If you followed the channel, you know that I love the Tudor Pelagos 39. I owned it for about a year and I only sold it in a frenzy of offloading many of my watches last year. Since selling, I've looked at it many times and I've considered if I was too hasty. You see, the full titanium small size diver is just something I simply enjoy wearing. And then I found this, the San Martin SN0121T. I've worn this every day for the last 2 weeks, and this just might change the way I see homage watches. I'm gonna break this video down into 3 sections. 1, how it compares directly to the Tudor model. 2, how is your money spent comparing one to the other, and which is a better value over time. Now, I know most people aren't actually considering buying one or the other, but it is, I think, an important question to ask what you can get for different price levels. And then 3, which would I do if I were you? Granted, I'm not you, so I can just explain what I'm planning to do, and you can explain why I'm wrong in the comments below. So for 1, first, the watch and how it compares to the Pelagos 39. See, I'm just as interested in luxury watches as many of you. However, I think it deserves pointing out that for consumers, there's a very low cost alternative for many of the popular watches of this era. Now, you won't get exactly the same feeling. The argument's always been if you can scratch the itch for less money, why not? Now, my rebuttal has always been yes, but it won't actually scratch the itch because the feeling between the two is very different. You'll still want that other watch. Now here's where things fracture a bit for me, and this watch makes me reconsider. See, I think my argument is still valid, but it kind of depends. So we'll start with the specs first. The San Martin here is a 38mm case with a 39mm bezel, whereas the Pelagos 39, the Tudor, is actually a 39mm case with a 40mm bezel, according to my calipers. It's 46 lug to lug on the San Martin, 46.93 on the Tudor. The San Martin has 20mm lug width, whereas the Pelagos has the 21mm lug width. It's 12.6mm thickness on the San Martin compared to the Pelagos 39 at 11.96, or basically 12mm. So feeling on the wrist, wearability, they're basically identical. You know, this is 96 grams and the other watch from Tudor is also 96 grams. So really very, very similar from just a general spec on paper layout. Now, the Tudor was criticized for having a sunray dial, reflective bezel insert, and for having lost the recessed indices of the original Tudor Pelagos. The clasp that they have on the Tudor also is a T-fit extension, so it ends up being really long and sometimes hard to size down beyond 6 3/4 inch wrists without it favoring one side of your wrist too much. And lastly, the lug width at 21mm is just annoying. Now the San Martin fixes all of that. It's got a matte bezel insert, matte dial. The bracelet adjustment system here is not nearly as well engineered. You have to force the bracelet down to each latch in the next setting and then press a button to release it. So it does require a decent amount of force, so it doesn't feel nearly as refined as something like the T-fit clasp, but still it offers a much smaller clasp, so it means that you can get it to fit your wrist or the bottom of your wrist a little easier than you can with the Pelagos. The recessed indices on the dial are back from the original Pelagos on the San Martin here, and this also has obviously the 20mm lug width versus 21. Now, the Tudor is a grade 2 titanium, and the San Martin is likely the same, just given that this grade is the least expensive to buy and produce. The San Martin doesn't really point out which one it is, but that's my assumption. Now, while the San Martin on paper does hold up quite well to the Tudor from just a general spec standpoint, things do change a little bit when you get into those refinement points. I already talked about the clasp, but also the bezel action is actually pretty decent. You know, it actually feels good as you rotate it. It doesn't feel overly cheap like it does on some other budget watches, but the actual knurling around the edge of the bezel is like a coin edge bezel. So if you test your finger on a quarter right now, your finger just slips off. So that is basically what it feels like trying to rotate this. So rotating it isn't that easy. You basically have to press down on the top just to get some grip. Same is true for the crown knurling here, where this passive knurl makes it really difficult to operate. The San Martin also has a ghost date position, and I think I can hear the date flip over at midnight or around there, which means the mechanism is still alive, the levers and everything, and the springs, which is funny because usually they just remove that portion of it, or at least I don't hear the date changeover. Maybe I haven't been paying attention before, whether it is or isn't there, so that's a very strange choice. Warranty-wise, the Tudor has a 5-year international warranty. The San Martin says 2 years, but Also, they can't guarantee water resistance on any of their watches, which you can see on this paper here. So I'm not sure that I trust that. Water resistance is the last issue. You know, I might not swim with this. I certainly wouldn't dive with this, despite it saying 300 meters water resistance. I've heard stories of these flooding. So, you know, obviously up to you which you prefer or whether or not you trust them. This also loses the red text on the dial. So all these things do make it different and in some ways certainly inferior to the Tudor, which you kind of would expect. So how does it perform beneath the surface though? You know, which is a better value over time? So that leads to our second point. Now, the first thing I'd like to point out is that if you haven't yet seen, this clasp had or has a medallion on it, just like the Submariner alternative here by San Martin. Now that actually fell off this Pelagos model, and I was just running around with my dog and it fell off. So just keep that in mind. The QC that you're buying here is at a lower cost. I imagine service and support isn't going to be that great. I will reach out to them and see if I can't get either a new bracelet or a new clasp or something in order to repair the thing that fell out. That should be covered under warranty, and I can report back here once I do that. Now, I recently did a comparison of the San Martin Submariner Homage versus my Rolex Submariner, and if you want to see that, I can link that up above and down below. But my argument there was that there isn't a $10,000 difference between them. At $250, you could buy, break, and replace the San Martin 40 times before you spent the same money. Now, granted, you're out all that cash, whereas the sub could still be sold for the same value, likely 10 to 20% less than the purchase price that you originally bought it for because it's worn, but that price would probably also adjust for inflation. So realistically, same buying power minus 10 to 20%. Now, the same argument is a little harder for the Tudor at $4,875 at retail and probably $3,700 average on the secondary market. So that's a much more reasonable argument at only 16 times. I think a lot of people would consider the Tudor or saving up for the Tudor rather than something like the San Martin. But we'll talk about that here in the third section. Now, this San Martin and all their watches are often criticized for their lack of originality, which is a kind way to put that they essentially stole the design from someone else. See, homage is a word that's used in purses, in watches, and it can describe being inspired by something. Like a watch designed after a famous car, it can describe also a watch where it took design principles from another famous watch, but they don't look identical, like the Daytona and the Zenith El Primero Chronomaster Sport. Or it can mean a replica watch with basically a different logo. Now, these San Martins fall definitely in the third category. There's nothing inherently wrong with that, assuming that you know that it's essentially the exact same watch as the luxury variant with a different logo on it. And it isn't obviously an original design, they just stole it. And whether or not copyright infringement is a moral question, that they should be able to do that or can do that, is obviously a whole other section we could have in a different conversation. Now, this third group of homage watches is usually the ones I don't wear or consider, but this watch has scratched the itch in many ways for the Pelagos 39, which I'll come back to here in a little bit. Now, the largest area these homages in the semi-replica category fall in is their movements. Often this is where they're criticized. Now, this has the Seiko NH35 movement in it, which is a very affordable movement. It's sold in basically everything, all these micro brands, Seiko watches, Invicta, and more. It has an awful stated factory accuracy of plus 20 seconds and minus 40 seconds, or maybe it's the other way. So a 60-second range. But you can always regulate that. As you can see here, I'm taking the back off the watch and using a screwdriver or tweezer or something like that to move the lever here to make it more accurate. Now, anecdotally, I built this entire bookshelf and Murphy bed combo behind me, and I'm in the process of moving my warehouse, which is full of steel and aluminum parts, while wearing this watch. I put it through a heck of a lot. That's why you can see all the scratches on it already. And despite all that shock and movement and banging it against things, you know, it's worked perfectly fine. I believe this Seiko movement is in many ways just as reliable, or 70%, let's say, as reliable as Rolex movements over a span of 50 years. So I don't really see that as a major downside, other than obviously the feeling aspect of it. The movement doesn't feel quite the same as a Tudor movement. Obviously, the Tudor is substantially better in some areas, but again, is it 16 times better? The Tudor is for sure the better value the longer the time horizon is. then the value of the Tudor stays relatively constant, whereas the San Martin obviously is going to be less expensive, and eventually most people won't care about this model. Now in the short term, the San Martin is obviously less money, so it's simply less cash out the door. If you're a serial flipper or don't hold on to your watches for a very long time like me, then San Martin again is probably a better value because you're going to lose more money in buying and selling the Tudor than you spend in one San Martin. Now it still comes down to your taste. If you care to pass things down to the next generation, or if you plan to swim often while wearing this watch. Now that leads to part 3, which is what I would do if I were you. Now, as I said, I'm not you, so this is basically what I'm doing. I'm using this San Martin the way that I think watches were once used, and it's basically just a tool for me. It tells the time, nothing more. I put this on, I don't think about how amazing it is. I don't think about, how this is the best watch that I've ever owned, and I don't have any emotional linkage to the watch specifically. I think the way we value something, if I think about this logically, the way we value something does change depending on how much money we've spent on it, proportionate to the amount of income that we have. And I think this changes the way that we take care of it. See, money is the storage and exchange of effort, of sweat equity. So when we spend $10,000 on a watch like this sub here, if you earn $100,000, you're saying this watch is worth 10% of your working hours for a year, depending on how much you actually receive after the government takes their taxes. So if money is our time and effort stored into a common value that can be traded, the larger the amount of an object is of your proportionate time for a year or a couple years, then the higher the associative value with the object. So for example, the same watch, if I make $1 million a year, this $10,000 watch is only worth 1% of my time. And the $100,000 car is worth 10% of my year. And so you will treat the watch differently purely because from a monetary value proportionate to your time, you will value it different. Now, if you make only $50,000 a year, this sub is a huge purchase and is going to be months of saving. So this San Martin probably won't scratch that itch because the value level of what you have at the end is going to be very different. You can take the same object from 2 different brands, but because a leather purse has a certain brand name on it, it has more value because we as a society have associated it with a larger value. Yes, the quality is better, but in general, price does reflect value, especially when it comes to proportionate to your level of income. So what I mean to say is that between this and the Tudor, I think if you have an itch for the Pelagos because of the design and the overall light wearable experience like I do, but you don't necessarily feel the need to add a $5,000 watch to your collection, I think this titanium diver is just simply a joy to wear, just like the Pelagos 39. Now, for me, I don't need another Tudor watch in my collection. I've already owned the Pelagos 39. For what I liked in the Tudor, it was the light wearable package and the general legible design, period. It had nothing to do with the name on the dial or the movement inside. It just didn't, that wasn't the thing that I bought the watch for. I bought it because I thought it was a compact, incredible design that was light and wearable. And so I used to wear it around the warehouse every so often, but I was more worried about hitting it every so often when I was back there. This actually gives me better use and better utility because it gives me the same light wearable package, but I can bang it against things and not think as much about it. And for me, where I'm looking at having my first child here shortly, the meaning of $5,000 proportionate to my expected disposable income is very different. And the Tudor is definitely not worth it at this point in time. So I return to the San Martin. Yes, this San Martin is ripping off a design by Tudor. This is not an original design, and that is a kind of a moral question that we can have at a separate date. But as long as the option is available to myself and to other watch enthusiasts like me, this culminates in a fantastic watch at a great price. Yes, it cuts corners, but you get what you pay for. Now, what do you guys think, and what did I miss? Let me know, and I'll see you in the comments below, and I'll see you in the next one. Take care.